Everybody's got that Facebook friend that says, I'm in a relationship with so and so. It's complicated. Nobody gets as complicated as being the wife, daughter, and mother of someone at the same time, excepting in perhaps the American South, as Hathor, the Egyptian goddess of, among plenty of other things, art. And I'm going to tell you about her. A hymn to Hathor says, Thou art the mistress of jubilation, the queen of the dance, the mistress of music, the queen of the harp playing, the lady of the choral dance, the queen of wreath weaving, the mistress of inebriety without end. Wow, she sounds hardcore. Inebriety without end. That means being drunk forever. Apparently, she was associated with cows. She was portrayed as a cow with like a stylized sun between her horns, like you see in Christian art. You've got like the person with the sun disc behind their head. Actually, comes from Egyptian art because they stole it because that's what religions do. But very specifically, Hathor just had a sun in between her horns because she was a cow and had horns. Even though, well, female cows don't have horns. Shut up. But she's associated with not only cows, but also falcons, cobras, lionesses, and hippopotami. So all the badass animals. I'm okay with that. Get this, in order to be part of her priesthood for her cult, which was centered in Dendera, you had to be like an artist or a dancer or a singer or an oracle or a midwife or any of those other things that counted as arts because, predictably, she was considered a goddess of the arts. She was also hailed as having so many different physical manifestations that they had to choose 7 of them, and those 7 were just the ones that people knew after that. So you had the 7 forms of Hathor. Hathor actually had more festivals dedicated to her than any other goddess. What up? Another thing about her is that more Egyptian children were named after her than any other god, which is kind of hardcore as well. Like, people really seemed to love Hathor, which, I'd get down for that. She is the goddess of all the cool stuff. So those 7 forms that I mentioned earlier, they were basically like fairy godmothers to children, because you had the 7 Hathors, and each of them had a different quality to them, and little kids would invoke the forms of that Hathor to help them out with stuff. Those 7 forms I was talking about earlier, the 7 Hathors, were basically like fairy godmothers to the kids in Egypt. So each of them would invoke a different spirit of Hathor at that time to be like, yeah, this Hathor helped me out by, letting me get this boy to like me, or whatever it is that children do or used to do in Egypt. I'm not quite sure about how children work. Anyway, those 7 forms are: she was a cow, sometimes a cow that was covered in stars, a lioness, a hawk, a cobra, a Nile goose, a hippopotamus, a sycamore tree, and, probably the most complicated of them, a woman with the ears of a cow and the headdress of horns holding the sun disk, like I mentioned earlier. She's got the horns and is holding the sun in it. Turns out that the hieroglyphic for the head of a cow was the word for wisdom. Hathor was both the daughter and wife of Ra, because that was a normal thing. They once argued, and she left Egypt and just left for a while. Ra was like, yeah, no, good riddance. Actually, wait, no, I miss you, come back. Like a lot of dudes do when they have a girl that just leaves them. They're like, yeah, whatever, I didn't need you. But actually, you were really cool. You want to come back? So he, went out to chase after her and try to get her back. But she changed into a cat. And in Egypt, cats are hardcore. So she was a cat with the superpowers that literally destroyed any man or god that approached her. So that's a really hardcore cat. Thoth, who is the god of the dead at that point, disguised himself and managed to convince her to return back to Egypt. So, but they had to get the god of the dead, who I assume wasn't able to be killed because he's the god of that thing, to like tell her to stop killing other like people and gods in cat form, and come back to Egypt. Hathor's name was actually in Egyptian, it would have been something like Het Heru, which is the house of Horus, Horus being the sun god, because Hathor was apparently the god of the sky, goddess of the sky, in addition to all the other cool stuff that she is the goddess of. And as such, technically, Hathor was housed, or rather, Hathor housed Horus, which is to say that they probably boned. According to some of the works of Aleister Crowley, she's usually seen as like a solar deity, or as the Egyptian equivalent of Venus or Aphrodite, which of course makes sense that she's a solar deity because she's the sky, and Horus, who is the god of the sun, or rather Ra, who is the god of the sun, and Horus, who is, it's complicated, lives in the sky and therefore inside of her. Funny thing about that, actually. In various different cities and at various different times, she was said to be both the wife and mother of Horus. So, you know, that's fun. What is it about, like, Egyptian gods that they can be the wife, mother, daughter, second cousin, lapdog, servant to the fourth retainer of something, and still be all those things at the same time? I'm not quite sure where any of that comes from, but we'll go with it. Written in Middle Egyptian, but probably during the New Kingdom period in Egypt, there is a book called the Book of the Heavenly Cow, which sounds like an awesome book title, that tells about the reasons that the world is imperfect because of humankind's, I guess, rebellion against the supreme sun god Ra, who used Hathor to dish out divine intervention and punishment and things to the people who are not being as good to Ra. You can find this reference to the Book of the Heavenly Cow on Wikipedia, which I will link in the description below, because it's actually really cool. The entire book is written on the walls of the chambers, or the walls of chambers in the tombs of several of the pharaohs, and portions of it appear even on the tomb of Ramses VI, which is pretty hardcore. But the earliest mention of this book specifically is on the burial shrine of Tutankhamun, which everyone's heard of before. The best part about the Book of the Holy Cow is that it paints her to be like a really vengeful, sort of bloodthirsty warrior type goddess, which is kind of at odds with the sort of drunkenness and art goddess, and here's why. So the story goes that Ra communicated to Hathor through her magic third eye, which she has because she's a god, and told her that some of the people in the land were planning to assassinate him. And she was like, "Oh no, we're not going to have any of that." So she got really angry, and she turned into the goddess Sekhmet, which is where now we've got the, like, sort of duality that a lot of gods and goddesses have in Egypt. It's great how you can be two different gods, but still be the same aspects of each other, and therefore be considered separate, but also the same thing. Anyway, Sekhmet was like a god of healing, but also a god of war and destruction and punching people in the face and you know, tearing people new orifices. Hathor went around murdering so many people, though, that Ra had to actually step in and do something about it. And I love the way that he did it. It's the best idea. So, Sekhmet was down there, and she would murder someone and drink their blood, and then murder someone and drink their blood, because that's what people do when you murder somebody, you drink their blood, right? Anyway, she was doing this so much that Ra caused a ton of blood-colored beer to just pour out onto the ground. And she, thinking that it was blood, was like, "Oh yes, give me this blood." And she drank all of it and became super drunk and turned back into Hathor and was all happy and such again. And that's how Sekhmet was there for a while during the period where there was this huge bloody war in Egypt, which is, of course, it's very similar to churned milk peg. The reason that you get stomach aches when you eat a nut is because of churned milk peg, not the chemicals in the nut. Well, the reason that they were having such a big and bloody war was because Hathor had turned into Sekhmet, not because of political intrigue or anything of the sort. There's a story in the Christian Bible that talks about when Moses is up on Mount Ararat, I want to say that it was, and he's getting the 10 Commandments from God. And he comes back down and he sees that everyone is worshipping a statue of a golden calf. It has been posited that that statue of a golden calf is a depiction of Hathor during that period, and they didn't want to just say, oh yeah, they were worshipping an Egyptian god. They wanted to try to make it sound like it was even more heathen by just saying, we made a cow, and you should worship it because it's made of gold and it's bigger than you, and therefore it's a god. Now, it wasn't actually like pre-established religious figures, so of course it would make sense that that would be one that they would choose to worship, especially because, she was the goddess of everything that was cool, of art and pleasure and drinking and being happy, and so why wouldn't you want a god like that one? So it would make sense that the reference in the Christian Bible about the golden calf is actually a reference to the people worshipping Hathor while Moses was busy up on the mountain, which must have been for a really long time, because you don't take everyone's gold, melt it, cast a giant cow out of like mud or something, and then pour all the gold into that thing and then dust all the mud off of it and have a giant solid gold cow, and then also develop a cult around it such that you can tell that they're worshipping it in like 3 days. So he must have been up on the mountain for quite a long time, which left Hathor plenty of time to get up in on that and be like, hey, you guys remember me since you were in Egypt and totally probably worshipped me before you left. Wouldn't it be cool if you worshipped me again? I'll give you wine. So perhaps the last thing that I'll throw about Hathor in this episode is that in Egypt they did practice blood sacrifice, but like in India, they didn't like killing cows, mostly because Hathor had the sort of manifestation of a cow, and then Hathor's like earthly avatar took the form of a cow. Her name was Hesat, and she took the form of like the life-giving cow goddess, and actually it was this earthly manifestation of Hathor that was the wet nurse of all of the other gods that were born after that. So she's seen as like the creator of all nourishment, and as such she was this Hesat was also considered to be the mother of Anubis, because Hathor is the one that creates all life because she creates the food that makes people be able to live, and Anubis is the one that takes it away. And then that was a thing. Hathor actually appears as a summon in the Shin Megami Tensei series of video games, which includes, the Persona and Devil Survivor games, which I think is actually really great. In that game, she is, similarly the cow-headed goddess of motherly love and good luck. She's the mother and also wife of Horus, the sky god. She's identified with the Greek goddess Aphrodite. That's all the same thing that we've heard already. And it's pretty great that way. She actually appears as a boss in one of the games, and then in a later version of that same instance, but a harder version of it, she's just a normal mob there. And that's pretty cool, that shows up in other games as well. In Shin Megami Tensei Strange Journey, she is a demon of the Megami race, which makes sense because Megami literally in Japanese just means goddess. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's everything I'm going to tell you about Hathor today. This one seemed a little bit scatterbrained because I was sort of making it up as I went, but then I did that with the other one too, so maybe it doesn't sound as scatterbrained as it does in my head. A-465, God of the Arts. So, today's episode was A-465, Arts, Hathor. See you guys next time. Give me more suggestions. I've already got one suggestion. I'm going to start doing them when I get like 5. Bye! Hey guys, thanks for watching my video on Hathor. I hope that you learned some cool stuff about Hathor, and possibly if you haven't already watched my other video on churn milk peg, we'll put that one up like here maybe somewhere. And then of course you can watch the next video here, and you'll watch that one too because I know that you all love me and all that. You could also push the subscribe button, which I'll put right here, and it'll be really good stuff. Totally click one of those three things, at least one of them, possibly all three. At the time of this recording, you could only really click on two of them, but we'll go with it. I will see you guys next time.